Well, thanks to everybody for all the hard work that has gone into preparing for this festival. It's really awesome. Second year that we are here, it was a lot easier for me. I don't know if it was easier for all the rest of the people who were planning it, but it was sure easier for me. And so I appreciated that, but I really want to thank everybody for all their hard work. And thank everybody for coming and for being here to honor the Lord our God. And that's a pretty exciting thing. And in my grid of my mind, if I can use that terminology, he's pointing at me. And in my framework, you know, I believe that the Lord wants us to be here. And I can get more specific than that. See, because when I say the Lord wants us to be here, it's like, yeah, us, we're here. But you are actually part of us because you're here. I'm part of us. We're all part of us. But there's this thing about it's not that we're here, but it's that you're here and I'm here. And I know a bunch of us are here for a whole bunch of different reasons. But I believe that it's the Lord that has drawn us together and wants us to be here. And I also believe that He has blessings for everybody who's here. And I don't know what it is that you need. It may be a healing, it may be a relationship, it may be just a break from whatever life has been dealing with you lately, but you're here. And so I would just say, trust in the Lord that He's got some good stuff for you. And, you know, it may not happen today, but, you know, they're 8 days. Well, you know, so it may happen tomorrow or the next day or the day after that, or, you know, I can't speak for the Lord on that. I do speak for the Lord on a lot of things, but not on that. There we go. So welcome to the feast 2017, and the foundation, and Roy already talked about this, that it comes out of the Old Testament in the 23rd chapter of Leviticus, that on the 15th day of the 7th month, and as you overlay the Hebrew calendar with our Julian calendar that we have, that's today. And so here we are for this Feast of Tabernacles, 7 days to the Lord, and it shall be a holy convocation. And that's what we're having right here. This is a convocation. Now there are points in this convocation that may seem sacrilegious. And they may seem that way because they might be that way. But hopefully not too many of those. But I thought even some of my friends would laugh at that. You can't laugh, okay. All right, so anyway, 15 days you've gathered the fruit of your land. This is a harvest festival. Now, in our nation today, you know, about all the food produced in our country, about 80% of it is controlled by like 5 different corporations or something, you know. And so the family farmer is almost extinct. To put him on an endangered species list or something like that. But back in the day when people lived in an agrarian society, they would harvest stuff and they had the bounty of the harvest. And so they come and celebrate. And so that's a part of what we're here doing, is we're worshiping God, we're honoring God, but God wants us to celebrate. And, you know, we all maybe have different ideas of what celebrate means. I mean, because if we could look in Webster's dictionary and he could tell us what it means. But we all have ideas of what it means to celebrate, you know? And so whatever it means to you to celebrate, I hope that you do that. Because, I mean, that's what the Lord wants us to do. And we want to do what the Lord wants us to do. And so if the Lord wants us to celebrate, then come on, let's celebrate. Take for yourselves the first day fruit of beautiful trees, branches of trees, and all that kind of thing, and they would make themselves these tabernacles or these booths, and they would like live in them. Our Jewish friends still make these booths, but they don't like live in them anymore. They just go out and eat in them, you know, and stuff. And so they've kind of changed, our Jewish friends, who really started this along with the rest of the Israelites, they've changed how they do it. You know, it's not the same, and we change how we do it because, you know, these are like our, you know, huts that were made out of 2x4s and stuff like that. So anyway, it's a little different, but hopefully the principle is the same. And then part of the foundation is you shall observe the feast 7 days when you gathered, you know, all your stuff. And you shall rejoice in your feast. I just like celebrating. Rejoicing means different things to different people, you know. And you might look at someone and you might not think they're rejoicing, but they could be rejoicing in their heart. But on account of you wouldn't know that unless you could like see inside of them, and God's the one who does that. So you wouldn't know that they're rejoicing. So don't assume because somebody doesn't look like they're rejoicing that they're not rejoicing. But we hope that everybody does rejoice. And we hope that you rejoice to the point that you actually show it, you know. Because it's like, you know, when you pour water in a cup, you know, I mean, you can have some water in there, and it's in there. And until you look in the cup, like you look in the heart, you don't know how much is there. But if you fill it all the way up and it's overflowing, like I read that somewhere, my cup overflows. Did I read that somewhere? I think I did. And so if your like cup is overflowing, if your rejoicing is overflowing, then people are going to see the mess that you made because you were just rejoicing so much that you overflowed. Or is it overflown? I don't know. But look at this, okay? You, your son, your daughter, your male servant, your female servant. So I am really excited that we have so much stuff for families and for the young people and for the teenagers. It's really exciting because everybody's supposed to rejoice. This isn't just a time for us to come here and read the scriptures, all of us that are told to go do much on Family Day. But it's a time for us to rejoice with our families and for our children to rejoice. And, you know, we've got some people here who have put a tremendous amount of work and effort in making sure that everybody has an opportunity to rejoice. And I just want to thank God for those people who have that kind of commitment to do that. I'm not one of them, but I thank God that we have people here who can do that. And that's one of the themes that we're going to talk about later on in the feast, is how we got a whole lot of different people that are really different. But that's really cool because in bringing all those different pieces together, we have something that we couldn't have by just if we were all like the same. So anyway, I don't want to get ahead of myself and give that sermon today. So it's a time for family rejoicing. That's important, and God said it's important. So if He says it's important, it's important. But check this out. The Levite, the stranger, the fatherless, and the widow. Now I know what it's talking about here when it says stranger is like a foreigner, the person that you don't know, and there are a lot of people here from out of town that we don't know. And then of course there's some of us that are stranger than others. I mean, you know. Speak for yourself. Right? Yeah, but there are folks we don't know. So hey, what I'm going to say is I know a lot of us kind of are like clustered and we came with groups of people that we know. But I'm going to suggest, it's just a suggestion, it's not the Word of God, so it's just a suggestion, that maybe like every day when we go over like right next door and have our meals, that at each meal you would like try to sit with somebody or some bodies that you don't know to get acquainted. You know? Get outside your comfort zone. And just meet some new people. And let's draw our circle bigger. And so we include everybody and people are cross-pollinating and all that kind of stuff. And just do that. And just be able to spend time with folks that you know you don't know. Because there was a time when you might not have known the people that you know now, but you got to know them over the course of time. So there's opportunity to know. So that's just a suggestion. Of course, be proactive in trying to get to know everybody. And then the fatherless and the widow, these are the people back in the day who were the fringes of society, who were at the margins. And so there are people like that, and so it's like, we need to include everybody. I mean, Jesus died on the cross for everybody, right? He wanted to save everybody, not just the beautiful people, not just the wealthy, famous people, but he died for us, the rest of us, you know. And so we want to include everybody because that's his heart. It's for everybody. So while it's fun to be with people that we haven't seen maybe in a while and all that kind of stuff, but the Lord would be really pleased if we, in the process of doing that, try to include people that we don't know. Amen. Okay, all right, there's an amen coming, all right. Okay. 7 days you keep a sacred feast to the Lord your God in the place which the Lord chooses. When we first kind of came together as a group, and it was pretty much Mrs. Doolam's idea to draw some people together, and I was her pastor a lifetime ago for some people in Pennsylvania, and then through a series of unfortunate but fortunate events, we reconnected, and then she had this idea from God. How about that? Is that a good way to put it? Instead of this, yeah, she had an idea from God that there would be this festival with kind of a freshness and a different kind of thing to it, and for some reason she thought that I might be able to do something like that, so I don't know. But we checked out a bunch of places. I didn't, but Roy and some of the other folks who knew more about this area checked out a number of different places. And this facility right here, when they came here after checking out some other places, it's like, and they said it, this is where God wants us to be. And so the way the staff has opened up to us and been accommodating, we really sense the blessing of the Lord and that he has chosen this place for us to be. It's not a destination, you know, but I don't know, if the Lord's here, maybe it is a destination. I mean, you know, where would you go if you knew God was going to be there? Where would you go? Would you like, never mind, okay. Anyway, you get the point. So we're believing that if God chose this place, that's because he's here, and even though there's a lot of physical preparation that we put into this, the Lord has put a whole lot more into it than we have. And so we're believing it's going to be good. And God's going to bless you, and you shall surely rejoice. So then we kind of come to the New Testament and Jesus. Last year, I talked about Jesus and the feast out of John chapter 7. This year, we're going to talk about Jesus and the feast out of John chapter 5. But Jesus went forth and began to say, repent, for the kingdom of heaven is at hand. That's the egg clips, actually. You know, what technology does to stuff. So anyway, we live in Columbia, Missouri, which is right the heart of where the eclipse went through, and some of the folks came down and we sat in our driveway and watched the eclipse, and man, that was something. You know, but there's been some stuff that has happened since the eclipse. And so I'm just going to recount some of the stuff that has happened from the eclipse. And y'all can probably say, oh, but there was more stuff than that. And you would be totally right. But we've had some hurricanes, like Harvey, Irma, Jose, Maria, that have just devastated parts of our country and our protectorates. And it wouldn't be quite so bad if it wasn't for the fact that FEMA is broke. Well, it wouldn't be just as bad, but it's even worse because FEMA is broke. FEMA's been broke for years. FEMA has been broke since Katrina. Y'all maybe don't know that, but I talk about how our nation is going to rebuild all this stuff. Where are we going to get the money to do that? Who are we going to borrow the money from to actually do that? This is really bad for our country and for our economy. Just because it didn't hit us, I mean, the repercussions of this are going to be felt for a long time. And then earthquakes. This is in Mexico. It was 8.1, 7.1, and 6.1 in these 3 different areas over about a 2-week span. We're talking about some serious earthquakes just south of us. Oh, but wait a minute, there have been 16 significant earthquakes since the eclipse, 5 of them significant. That's what the people who talk about earthquakes and all that stuff, they call them significant earthquakes. There have been 16 of them, 5 of them have been in the U.S. 2 of them have been in California. 1 was in Illinois, 1 was in Oklahoma, and 1 was in Montana. Now, just because we didn't hear about them, the people that do all the earthquake measuring and stuff, they say they were significant. And I read that on the internet, so it has to be true. And then there are wildfires. Some of you have been following the wildfires. Here in the United States, Forest Service reporting that 2017 is shaping up to be the worse than average year based on the number of acres and private land, state lands that have been burned. So far, 5.6 million acres have burned, almost 2 million, more than the average. That's where all of the fires are, if you can see that. I know some of these maps and stuff that I put in here you may not be able to see it very well. But all those little red things, those are fires, okay? Some states like Nevada are saying that it's the worst in 15 years. Montana has already used much of its firefighting budget, even though the rest of the state's still in drought. On the other side of the globe, it looks like the end of the world. I just dropped that out of an article I read on the internet. Especially in Italy and Romania, where an area the size of Rhode Island is burned. Oh, that's Europe. You can see the red down in there, those areas, the fires. Total is roughly 3 times the normal amount of summer wildfires. 60 people died in Portugal. In Siberia, large swaths in Brazil, South Africa, New Zealand. In January, Chile, which is it's their summer in January. A similar number of wildfires due to a combination of drought and high temperatures. There'll be famines, pestilences, earthquakes in various places. All of these are the beginnings of sorrows. I mean, so stuff is happening around the world. Now here's the deal, okay? Well, I don't know what this is thinking of. That's just the way I talk. My mother became part of the Worldwide Church of God in 1959. She had a pregnancy with a stillborn. She was rushed to the hospital, and she died on the operating table. And then she was hovering above herself. Now this will shake some of you up as far as what you believe about life after death and stuff, okay? So I just tell this story to my friends. She didn't tell me this for years. She never told me this, okay? And I think it really troubled her with what we believe about life after death and all that stuff. But anyway, she saw herself hovering over herself. And the doctor says, she's gone. And then she came back to life. This is before, clear, and they shocked her and stuff, But she came back to life. This was like 1956 or 57 or something like that. So anyway, she knew that God spared her life for something, and so she started studying the Bible and going to Bible classes and taking correspondence courses. And one of them that she ended up taking was the Ambassador College Bible Correspondence course, and got involved with Worldwide Church of God in 1959. This is actually my 56th festival that I'm attending. We have some folks who are here for the first time. I know a couple of them are from our congregation, and we're glad they're here. So it's pretty exciting. But I remember being told, and some of you might remember this stuff too, that I was never going to graduate from high school because Jesus was going to come back. Okay. Then I was told that I was never going to graduate from college because Jesus was going to come back. Now there are other people who told me I was never going to graduate from college for other reasons, and then it's like you're never going to get married because Jesus is going to come back, and then you're never going to have kids because Jesus is going to come back, and then you're never going to have grandkids. And look at me now. I actually have grandkids. Could have thought. And so when people talk to me about, oh, the end is near, I say the sky's falling. Because I've been hearing that stuff all my life. And if you wanted to talk to somebody about that, you should not talk to me about it because I don't really care. Because I done heard that enough. Okay, so I'm like the skeptic about all that stuff, okay? I'm just telling you where I'm at. But even the skeptic all of a sudden is beginning to scratch his head and say, hey, there's something going on here. And so, yeah, there's stuff happening and going on. There's no doubt about that. Beginning of the sorrows. Will deliver you up to tribulation, kill you, be hated of all nations for my name's sake. And many will be offended, betray one another, will hate one another. And because lawlessness and iniquity shall abound, the love of many will grow cold. Yeah. You know, I couldn't believe what happened in Las Vegas this week. I mean, you can say what you want to say about Las Vegas, but where some guy just takes a sniper perch and just starts shooting automatic weapons into a crowd of people going to a country music concert. Our nation has gotten jacked up. Things have changed. Like I say, the skeptic is even buying into that, okay? Things are different than they used to be. There's no doubt about that. And immediately after the tribulation of those days, people wonder how much worse are things going to have to get. Well, the Bible describes the tribulation as the worst time ever in human history. And so you think about a time in human history that's been bad, and it's going to be worse than that. Okay. So anyway, the sun's not going to give its light, the stars are going to fall from heaven, the powers of heaven will be shaken, and the sign of the Son of Man will appear in heaven, and all the tribes of the earth will mourn, and they'll see the Son of Man coming in the clouds of heaven with power and great glory. And he'll send his angels with a great sound of a trumpet, and they'll gather together his elect from the four winds from one end of heaven to another. And we believe that that's what this Festival of Trumpets that we observed 2 weeks ago today is all about, is when that trumpet call sounds and the dead are changed and Jesus finally comes back. I had a guy ask me about my age, and he said, where was Jesus when my father was burning me with a cigarette? Talk about somebody who's hard to believe that God is really for you. Where was Jesus when my dad was burning me with a cigarette, when I was crying and praying for Jesus to grant me relief from him? Where was Jesus? And I looked this guy in the eyes and I said to him, Jesus was right there with you, crying his eyes out. And for the first time in his life, he let go of that. Because he knew that Jesus was there and that Jesus cared. And so we wonder, where is God? The people who build the case that there is no God, when they look around this sin-sick world, that's why so many people believe in it, because Jesus he's not intervening yet. But that doesn't mean he's not aware of the pain that the people of this earth are going through. But the time is coming. And it's like, I think of it like the John Wayne movie, where finally, he goes over there and he grabs his gun and he straps it on and he gets on his horse and he's going to ride into town and he's going to make things right. And that's what Jesus is going to do one of these days. And the trumpet begins all of that. We read the scripture today. Behold, the day of the Lord is coming. And that day his feet will stand on the Mount of Olives. The Lord my God will come, and the saints are going to come with him, because when the trumpet sounds, the dead are going to rise. You know, and then we who are alive and remain are going to meet the Lord in the air, so we're all going to be with the Lord. I want to take us on a little history tour here. Some of you like history, some of you may want to sleep through this part. but I'm going to try to make history interesting. That's my challenge for today. But the early church fathers and what they believed about the millennium. If you've never heard any of this or read any of this, I hope you find it unbelievably fascinating. Here's a guy who was born about 60 AD, 130 AD. His name was Papias. He lived in the city of Hierapolis. This is out of Colossians chapter 4, verse 12. It says, Epaphras, who is one of you, a bondservant of Christ, greets you. So Paul is writing from prison in the 60s, around 60 AD, and he's writing this letter to the Colossians. And he says, Epaphras, who's there with Paul, greets you, always laboring fervently for you in prayers, that you may stand perfect and complete in all the will of God. For I bear witness that he has a great zeal for you and for those who are in Laodicea and those in Hierapolis. So, here's a map. I don't know if you can really see this very good or not, but this in red over here is the island of Patmos, which is right off the coast from Ephesians, from Ephesus. Okay, so Epaphras and Ephesus and, whatever else. Okay, so when John was released from prison, the guy who wrote, John the Apostle, the guy who wrote the book of Revelation, when he was on the island of Patmos, when he was released from there, he went to Ephesus. And he lived on there for a number of years. Some people say as late as 120 AD. And he was a very, very old man. And they would carry him on a cot to church. And he'd come to church, and he would sit up on the cot, and he would, this was a sermon, this is what he would say. If you just love one another, it's enough. And then he laid back down, and he carried him home. Now, some of y'all went to church, and your sermon was that short, you would love it. And some of the rest of you would say, what? What was that? Well, think about it. Think about that. Anyway, but you remember the 7 churches of the book of Revelation, because you have Ephesus, Smyrna, Pergamos, Thyatira, Sardis, Philadelphia, Hierapolis, Laodicea, Colossae. So Paul had been to Ephesus, but had never been over to these other cities, and he writes to Colossae, a church that he had never been to. But you have these 3 churches who kind of make a triangle. And so this guy Epaphras is from Hierapolis. And so our guy Papias, okay, he was born in 60 AD. Now, I don't know when he became a Christian, but it's very conceivable that he was acquainted with the Apostle Paul. It is not beyond reason. And he certainly was acquainted with a guy named Polycarp, who was the bishop of Smyrna, who was a disciple of John. Okay, so this Papias had a connection with the early Christian leaders. In Papias' account, this is what he says, that there would be a certain millennium after the resurrection, and that there would be a corporal, that means physical, bodily, reign of Christ on this very earth. All the animals feeding only on the produce of the earth shall live in peaceful harmony together and in perfect subjection to man. Wow. That sounds like reading out of Isaiah chapter 11, then. Not like Revelation chapter 20. Then we have Justin Martyr, who was the premier theologian of the 2nd century. Now, I thought about not quoting Justin Martyr, okay, because I'm quoting this and I'm like saying he was good about this, but then there's other stuff I'd say he's bad about that, okay? But I'm quoting him anyway. But I and others, he says, who are right-minded Christians on all points, so basically just putting it out there, he's throwing down on you, are assured that there will be a resurrection of the dead and 1,000 years in Jerusalem, as the prophets Ezekiel and Isaiah and others declare. So that's what Justin Martyr said in the 2nd century. Now the deal about Justin Martyr, he is probably the guy that people quote most about Sunday worship, because he also says that Christians met on Sunday in honor of the Lord's resurrection. So that's why I kind of debated about quoting him, because I don't want you to think everything he said is right. But who has never said something in error? So I decided to quote him anyway. And then we get Tertullian, who lived in Carthage in North Africa. He's called the father of Latin Christianity because most of what he wrote was in Latin. It's all Greek to me. But we do confess that a kingdom is promised to us upon the earth, although before heaven, only in another state of existence, inasmuch as it will be after the resurrection for 1,000 years in the divinely built city of Jerusalem, let down from heaven. So we might argue a couple of finer points in what he said, but let's cut the guy some slack. I mean, he had most of it right there, didn't he? Hippolytus, who was a disciple of Irenaeus, who was a disciple of Polycarp, who was a disciple of John, who was a disciple of Jesus. See, I see that train, right? See, I see that chain of connection. For the Sabbath, this is 170 to 230, so it's like 200 AD. For the Sabbath is a type and emblem of the future kingdom of the saints, where they shall reign with Christ when he comes from heaven, as John says in the Apocalypse. Here we are. We have all these early church fathers, and they're talking about the millennium. How cool is that? And Lactantius. Now, I really like Lactantius here, because he was an early Christian author who became an advisor to Constantine, the first Christian emperor of the Roman Empire, guiding his religious policy as it developed and a tutor to his son Crispus. Lactantius actually met Constantine before Constantine was the emperor. And then after that, Lactantius became a Christian, and he was invited to Rome because Constantine was impressed with him to be his advisor. But when this is what Lactantius said, when he shall have destroyed unrighteousness and executed his great judgment, and he shall have recalled the righteous, or to life the righteous, who have lived from the beginning. So that's going back to Abraham and Isaac and Jacob and Noah and those guys, right? Will be engaged among men 1,000 years and will rule them with his most just command. This guy advised Constantine. Then they, who shall be alive in their bodies during those years, shall produce an infinite multitude, and their offspring shall be holy. So what he's saying is that the people, the physical people who live on through the tribulation into the 1,000 years, they're going to have kids. And a world that's going to be beautified, and their kids are going to be called holy and beloved of God. But those who shall be raised from the dead shall preside over them in the living, or preside over the living and judges. Whoa, I read something about that in Revelation chapter 20 and verse 4. I like this guy. So what happened? I mean, here you have this train down to like 300 AD, and then all of a sudden it gets derailed. So what happened to that? Well, this is what happened. This guy named Augustine, who was brilliant, but he was kind of depraved. And he struggled with his own flesh and kind of became what we call an ascetic. In other words, he believed that in order to serve God, you had to deny all the desires of the flesh, even to enjoy good food and all of that, which God, like says you should do when you come to the feast, because it's a feast, okay? All right. So anyway, so he's just like, everything with the flesh is bad. So then Augustine rejected the literal millennium because of its emphasis on physical pleasures to be enjoyed during the 1,000 years. Such ideas are believable only by the carnal. So you know what he thinks of you. That you're a carnal, physical, sensual being. See, but the thing is, I mean, God created Adam and Eve, placed them in the garden, and if they'd have stayed in the garden, what a wonderful world it would be. But that didn't happen. But God's not against us enjoying life, because he's the one who created us and for life to be wonderful and beautiful and happy and joyful and all that stuff. Modern scholars agree that to read out of the Old Testament a literal, physical, political rule of Christ on the earth after the close of the church age, as premillennialists do, and that's us. If you believe Jesus returns and enters the millennium, you're a pre-millennialist. Is to fall victim to the old tendency to Judaize Christianity, and we don't want to do that. One thing we don't want to do is to Judaize Christianity. So they got to reject the millennium, which is what most scholars have done. But then you have this guy, who is the premier Protestant scholar of the 20th century, Karl Barth. Okay, they asked him one time what the theme of the New Testament is. If somebody asks you, what's really the theme of the New Testament? We might say that Jesus came to fulfill prophecy and save the lost, stuff like that. He said, the theme of the New Testament is, Jesus loves me. This I know. Or the Bible tells me so. It is just that simple. They asked him what the book of Romans was about. And he said, the book of Romans teaches me that God is God and I'm not. A lot of people don't know that yet, because they still think that they're God. And there are a lot of real subtle ways that we think that we're God too, by the way. But this is what he said. The premier scholar, he said, Jews have God's promise. And if we Christians too have it, then it is only as those chosen with them, as guests in their house, that we are new wood grafted onto their tree. So what are we Christians doing, most of the Christian world? Rejecting everything that's Jewish out the Old Testament. And just rejecting it because we're Christians and it's all too sensual. So things really got jacked up, didn't they? And in the midst of all of that, we heard a voice crying in the wilderness and telling us about things like this. It shall come to pass in that day, Isaiah 11:11. That the Lord shall set his hand again the second time to recover the remnant of his people who are left, because this world is going to be on the brink of eternal destruction. And then Jesus is going to intervene. It is not a fairy tale. But we do live happily ever after. See, there's something about fairy tales. The kids love fairy tales because we like this live happily ever after thing. Because that's part of what God has written into us as human beings. It says in the book of Ecclesiastes that God has put eternity in our hearts. And so there's something about us that we desire to live forever. And we can go off and talk a whole lot about why people don't think too much about their own death, because we want to live forever. But what I've found about, and I worked in a hospital for almost 20 years, what I've found about people who are believers is that they are not afraid to die. If you're a believer and you're afraid to die, then you don't have a whole lot of faith. Okay, I'm just going to say that. I'll throw that on there. Because people of faith are not afraid to die. It's just that nobody wants to hurt. And it's hard to say goodbye to the people that you love. That's the problem with death, is that you don't want to hurt. It's hard to say goodbye. But we know that Jesus died on the cross so that we can live forever. That our sins can be forgiven, and that he was resurrected from the tomb proves that there is a resurrection and that we can have life everlasting because of him. And it is not a fairy tale. It's the fact. And we all desire that. The wolf also shall dwell with the lamb, and the leopard shall lie down with the young goat. The calf and the young lion and the fatling together, and the little child shall lead them. The cow and the bear shall graze, and the young one shall lie down together, and the lion shall eat straw like the ox. The nursing child shall play by the cobra's hole, and the weaned child shall put his hand in the viper's den. They shall not hurt or destroy and all my holy mouth. I remember one time hearing Dr. Herman Haig talk about this verse. Some of you don't know who he was, but he was a historian, the primary church historian for the Worldwide Church of God. I remember him commenting on this passage of Scripture and saying, if God can do this to animals, what can he do to people? To change the nature of people, so that people who prey on one another and devour one another. If he can change the nature of animals, can he change the nature of man so that people can get along like the rest of creation? And that's what the Lord is going to set his hand to do when he comes back. For the earth shall be full of the knowledge of the Lord as the waters cover the sea. Are you looking for that day? You want to see that day? The feast pictures the future reign of the Messiah on the earth. Devil is bound. Revelation chapter 20, first 3 verses. But I don't know if these come out very well, but these are pink spoons like you get at Baskin Robbins. Okay, and you have the big one, like if you order something, you get the big one, right? But if you just want to taste, they give the little pink spoon. And you get just a little taste. That's what this feast is. It's like the pink spoon, okay? And we just get a little taste of the peace and the harmony and the joy and the fellowship and the unity and the oneness and the harmony and all those descriptors that we can use about the future. And we just get a little taste of it. Just a little bit of God's love for us and our love for one another and the cooperation and the fellow feeling and all of that stuff. But you get that little taste and you say, man, I think I want a whole cone of that. But this is just a little bit, just to kind of whet our appetites for what God has in store for the future. So do you really believe in the millennium and the Messianic age? Okay, so we got a couple people who are tracking with the old man. Do you really believe in the Millennium Falcon? All right. Never mind. It's like, can you find Waldo in this picture, But do you really believe in it? Okay, so I'm not just asking this question because it's a question to ask. I'm asking this question because I want you to really believe in it. And I know that in a group this size, there's going to be probably 15 to 20 people, I'm just going off percentages of stuff that I know, who are probably not really going to believe in it. Now, please don't be offended. I didn't say you don't know about it. I didn't say you couldn't turn to the scriptures and talk about it. I'm just saying that knowing something and believing something are two different things. We all know about it, but do we really believe it? See, because when you really believe in something, you can actually see yourself as part of it. This is the cockpit of a jet aircraft, getting ready to take off an aircraft carrier. And there's the pilot's hand on the joystick. And the steam catapult in the belly of this aircraft carrier is going to throw this airplane off the end of it. And in 3 seconds, he's going to go to 160 miles an hour. Now, I do not believe that I can fly a jet aircraft. I don't believe that if I was young, that I could fly a jet aircraft. Because there's a whole lot of math and stuff that people who fly these things have got to be able to do. I mean, yeah, I know your teacher said to you, you can grow up and be anything you want to be. I could never have been a jet pilot, okay? Ain't never going to happen. I don't believe it, and I could never do it because I don't believe it. I can't see myself there. If I believed it, I could see myself sitting in the cockpit of that jet. But I can't see it on account I don't believe it. We covered this last year. Henry Ford, whether you think you can or whether you think you can't, either way, you're right. Jesus simply said, according to your faith be it unto you. Because if you don't believe it, it's not going to happen. If I don't think I can climb a mountain, I'm not going to even try, am I? But if I think I can climb a mountain, if I believe I can climb a mountain, if I can picture myself at the top of the mountain waving the flag, then I might actually try. And if I try, I might actually succeed. But if I don't believe I can do it, why would I even try? So whether you think you can, you think you can't, either way you're right. So I could never see myself as a jet pilot. But I can see myself as a race car driver. Now I can see myself doing that. Some people think I already see myself doing that by the way I drive at times. But having said that, see, I can see myself doing this. And because I can see myself doing this, I believe that I can do this. I do not believe I can fly jets, but I believe I can do this. And I just know, because I've talked to a whole lot of people for a whole lot of years about the promises of God in the Bible. And I've actually heard people say things like, well, I know that that's in the Bible, and I know and I believe that it's true for you, but I don't believe it's true for me. And so I'm like looking through the Bible, and I'm trying to find this verse, this promise of God with this parentheses that says it's true for everybody except fill your name in the blank in parentheses. And I still haven't found that one. I got a couple of concordances that I can look at, and I still don't think I'm going to find that verse. But yet there are people who interpret the scriptures that way, and they think that these verses are true for you, and how wonderful it is that they're true for you, but it's not really true for me. Because they can't see themselves flying in a jet. How you get to that point is something a little bigger than what I can talk about right now. But we're going to start talking about it tomorrow, okay? When we get into John chapter 5. But I want you to really think about that. Because can you see yourself in the victor's stand? Can you see yourself there? Jesus comes back, and there is this day or night or whatever it is, whether it may be no day or night there. I don't know how all it's going to work. I just don't know. But what if Jesus comes up to you, and he's got the gold medal, and he's going to put it around your neck? And he really is going to put a crown on your head. And not like that crown talked about in 1 Corinthians chapter 9. It was made of plants and was going to decay one day. The crown for eternity. And you're there, and Jesus is coming up to you. And he's putting this around your neck because you're on a victor's stand. And he's putting a crown on your head. And this is not like a business meeting where you're getting your gold watch and a handshake. I mean, this is Jesus, who knew you before the foundation of the world. And he's coming up now, and he is congratulating you after you've been resurrected from the dead or changed the spirit or whichever comes first for you. And he's going to take his great big Jesus arms and wrap them around you and hug you. Hold you. On account of you made it. Because you believed that you could. And you believed in him. That you could. Because I guarantee you, without him, you couldn't. Okay? We had this guy when I was in Pennsylvania. You probably didn't even know this guy because I think he maybe showed up after you left. Why did you leave our church anyway? Oh, sorry, you got married because of that guy. Okay. He's the culprit. Anyway, we had this guy in our congregation who escaped communist Hungary in 1954. Some of you know your history. You may know that there was a rebellion that was crushed by the communists, of course. But in the process, in 1954, a whole bunch of people escaped. And this guy was one of them. And he got out because his father put him on his shoulders and he walked. And he walked across the Danube River. That's how he got to freedom. There isn't anybody in this room that's going to get to freedom unless Jesus carries you on his shoulders. That's the only way that you're going to do it. It's the only way I'm going to do it. It's the only way anybody is ever going to do it. See, but part of this thing of do you believe you can is like, oh, I don't believe I can do that. But can Jesus do it? Because he will put you on his shoulders. It's kind of like that picture, some of you have seen that picture about when Jesus goes out after that lost little lamb thing, you know? Okay, block out all your concept of what Jesus looked like. Just think about the lamb right now on somebody's shoulders, all right? Because a lot of us will look at that and all of a sudden we'll miss the whole point of being carried. It's somewhere that we can't go, to do things that we can't do. Totally impossible. But by our faith, it becomes possible. If you believe you can. If you believe it. Now, like I said, I know in a group like this because I've dealt with people for 40-some years. I know that there are a handful of people who believe it may be true for the person sitting next to them, but it might not be true for them. I just know that. But I also know that it can be true for you. But it can only be true for you if you believe it's true. Because whether you believe you can or believe you can't, either way you're right. Jesus wants you to be on that stand. He wants to celebrate when he returns. That's part of what this festival was about, is that celebration of the victory that we have in our Savior Jesus. We have some technical difficulties today because I had this song that is a really powerful song, sung by a guy named Alvin Slaughter. A lot of you probably never heard of him because he may be in a different genre of music than most of you have heard of. But he's singing this song about the resurrection of the dead. And we had some technical difficulties, so we connected. So I'm like, that was going to be my conclusion, because that was going to be, I mean, I thought, man, this, yeah, well. Anyway, but we just had technical difficulties, and we just couldn't do that. And so, ever since I found out we had technical difficulties, I've been saying, God, okay, how are we supposed to end this thing today? Because that was the end. This is not really the end. And I'm like, and that was the end. And so, I'm like, what's the end? So I don't really have an end. God just didn't download it now. Just be honest with you. I'm not going to try to fake it and make up some real cool end. I just don't have one. But I think you got a lot to think about. Yeah. Because Pennsylvania. We lived in this little place up in the country. It was really kind of neat, little house we had back in the woods on a dead-end road, and all the land around us was landlocked because utility companies owned it, and other people and stuff. So it was really pretty neat. But the water was really hard. So we ran through water softener, and then it tasted real yucky. And so there was a spring about 5 miles away, and I'd go up there every Friday morning and fill up all these jugs of water, you know, and I've been doing this for years. And because they're drinking water. This is pretty good. So I'm up there filling up these jugs one day, and this pickup pulls up, and this gal jumps out of it, all dressed in her Department of Natural Resource uniform thing, you know, and she just says, you know, that spring is contaminated. And then she jumps back in her truck and takes off. I don't know who she was. She just showed up, said that spring's contaminated. I've been drinking this water for years. And then all of a sudden I thought, should I be drinking this water? So I go home and I get the phone book up. This is before, you know, you could look up on the internet, send people emails and stuff. So I get the phone book out and I look for the state extension office in Evansburg, Missouri, there where the county thing is. And I call them up and say, hey, you know about that spring up there on Highway 22? Is it contaminated? Well, we cannot confirm or deny whether any spring is contaminated. You just have to drink that water at your own risk. Well, I've been drinking it at my own risk for years. I thought it was good, didn't have any problems. And all of a sudden somebody come by and say, hey, you know, it's contaminated. And I'm like, should I drink this? Should I not drink this? I don't know. And you know what? She did not convince me that the water was bad. All she did was create a doubt as to whether or not the water was good. That's all she did. Create a doubt as to whether or not the water was good. Doubt is the pinhole in your life raft. And that's what the devil likes to do, is create doubt. But if you can see yourself victorious, you will be. You have the faith to believe that. Now tomorrow we're going to talk about a little bit more out of John chapter 5 when Jesus went to the feast in Jerusalem and some of the stuff that happened. And it'll be good. It'll be good. You have to come back tomorrow. Okay, so what I'd like to do now is quit. Because sometimes it's hard to quit. You know, you ever been, you know, when somebody can't actually quit when they should have quit? You know, like 3 Bible verses ago or something, they just should have quit. So I'm gonna quit. Thank you.